Marcus Johnson believed he had finally repaid his mother's lifetime of sacrifice when he moved her into a breathtaking mansion overlooking the city. Confident she would never struggle again, he left on a 4-month international business expansion. But behind his back, the woman he loved threw his elderly mother out with nothing but a small suitcase. 4 months later, Marcus returned expecting a warm embrace, only to freeze in horror when he spotted an old black woman selling roasted corn on a busy street. The closer he walked, the more his entire world began to collapse. Long before the glass towers and the private jets, Marcus Johnson was a barefoot boy in a cramped apartment on the south side of the city, listening to his mother's tired footsteps return long after midnight. Evelyn Johnson worked 3 jobs at once: scrubbing floors before sunrise, folding laundry through the afternoon, and standing over a smoking grill of roasted corn on street corners until the last customer walked away. She never complained, not once, not even when her hands cracked from the cold or her knees gave out from standing too long. Every dollar she earned went toward one thing only: her son's future. At night, when Marcus asked why she worked so hard, she would kneel beside his bed, brush the hair from his forehead, and whisper the same words she repeated for 20 years. "You don't need to be rich, baby. You just need to be a good man." That single sentence became the compass of his entire life. He carried it through scholarship applications, through overnight shifts at a warehouse to pay for textbooks, through years of rejection, before his first real estate deal finally closed. He carried it when he built his second company, and his third, until one day, the boy who once ate day-old bread became the CEO of one of the largest real estate empires in the country. Reporters called him a self-made billionaire. Investors called him a visionary. But in his own mind, he was still that same barefoot child, and every skyscraper he built felt like another brick laid in gratitude to the woman who sacrificed everything for him. There were winters when the heat in their small apartment barely worked, and Evelyn would give Marcus the only blanket while she sat wrapped in a thin sweater at the kitchen table, sorting coins into small paper envelopes labeled rent, food, and school supplies. There were summers when she walked nearly 2 miles each way to save the cost of a bus fare, arriving at her second job with blistered feet, but never once mentioning the pain to her son. Marcus remembered watching her hands, rough and scarred from years of hot grills and harsh cleaning chemicals, and promising himself silently that one day those hands would never have to work so hard again. He kept that promise etched somewhere deep in his chest through every failure, every rejection letter, every year he spent building something from nothing. When Marcus finally purchased the mansion, a sprawling estate with marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a view that stretched across the entire skyline, there was only one person he wanted to walk through it with. He picked his mother up himself, refusing to let a driver do it, and guided her slowly from room to room, watching her eyes widen with every doorway. In the master suite overlooking the garden, he finally stopped, turned to her, and said the words he had been saving for 20 years. "Mom, this house is finally yours." Evelyn pressed both hands to her mouth and wept, not because of the marble or the chandeliers, but because she finally understood that every long night, every blistered hand, every missed meal had led to this single moment. Marcus held her while she cried, feeling for the first time in his adult life that he had truly settled a debt that money alone could never repay. It was during that same visit that he introduced her to Vanessa Carter, the woman he had been dating for nearly a year, the woman he was already certain he would marry. Vanessa arrived dressed elegantly, but not excessively, greeting Evelyn with a warm smile and a gentle embrace that seemed to melt away any nervousness in the room. She complimented Evelyn's cooking before even tasting it, asked about her childhood in rural Georgia, and insisted on helping set the table for dinner despite the staff offering to do it for her. Marcus watched with quiet pride as the two most important women in his life laughed together over dessert, completely unaware that the woman sitting across from his mother was rehearsing a performance she had perfected long before that evening. To Marcus, it looked like the beginning of a new family. To anyone watching closely, it might have looked like something else entirely, but no one was watching closely enough. Weeks later, business obligations pulled Marcus away for an extended expansion across Europe, a 4-month commitment to open new offices in London, Paris, and Milan. The night before his flight, he sat with his mother on the mansion's private balcony, the city lights spread beneath them like scattered stars. He held her hand the way he had when he was small, promising to call every single day, no matter the time difference. Evelyn smiled and told him not to worry about her, that she finally had everything she needed. Neither of them could have imagined how quickly that promise would unravel once his plane left the runway. The very night Marcus boarded his flight, something shifted inside the mansion walls. Vanessa stood at the window watching the plane's lights disappear into the clouds, and the warmth she had shown for months seemed to evaporate along with it. By morning, she was no longer calling Evelyn Mom. She addressed her simply as Evelyn, her tone clipped and businesslike, as though a switch had been flipped the moment Marcus was out of reach. Within days, she had replaced the housekeeper Evelyn had grown fond of, hiring a new staff who answered only to her. Certain rooms in the mansion were quietly locked, their keys transferred into Vanessa's private safe. She began making decisions no one had authorized her to make, rearranging schedules, controlling the household budget, and speaking to Evelyn as though she were a guest overstaying her welcome rather than the matriarch of the family. When one of Marcus's business partners questioned why Vanessa had assumed full control of the estate, she simply smiled and said, Marcus was too soft-hearted to manage details like this, that someone practical needed to run things while he was away. No one thought to question a woman so trusted by the man they all respected. Living under the same roof as Evelyn had never truly appealed to Vanessa, not since the very first dinner where she smiled through gritted teeth. She found Evelyn's presence suffocating, a constant reminder of a past she wanted no part of, a past written in worn hands and modest speech patterns that clashed violently with the image Vanessa had spent years constructing for herself. She saw Evelyn not as Marcus's mother, but as an obstacle standing between her and the polished, elite life she believed she deserved as the future wife of a billionaire. The turning point came on an evening when several of Vanessa's friends visited the mansion for cocktails, women dressed in designer labels who spoke in the practiced cadence of old money, even though most of them had married into it rather than been born to it. Evelyn, unaware of the judgment simmering beneath their polite smiles, joined them in the sitting room, offering warm conversation and homemade sweet tea. The women exchanged glances over her worn cardigan, her country accent, and the calloused hands that had spent decades gripping mop handles and corn tongs rather than manicure tools. Their laughter, quiet but unmistakable, followed Evelyn out of the room when she excused herself early that night. Vanessa did nothing to defend her. Instead, she felt a hot flash of humiliation, embarrassed that her friends had witnessed the woman she was expected to call family. That night, long after the guests left, she sat alone in the dark, turning over a single decision in her mind. Evelyn Johnson did not fit into the life she had built for herself, and if Marcus was too blind to see it, then she would simply remove the problem before he ever returned. Within a week, Vanessa began constructing a story so convincing that even Evelyn, a woman not easily fooled, began to doubt her own instincts. She claimed Marcus had called from overseas, expressing quiet concern that his mother might be more comfortable in a private senior community, one with medical staff and other residents her age, rather than alone in a mansion designed for entertaining executives and hosting business dinners. She said Marcus felt guilty, even suggesting it, but believed it was truly for Evelyn's own good. Evelyn, stunned, asked to speak with her son directly, but Vanessa explained that the time difference made calls difficult, and that Marcus had asked her to handle the arrangements personally so he wouldn't have to worry about logistics from overseas. To strengthen the lie, Vanessa produced official-looking documents, complete with letterhead and signatures, claiming they were transfer papers Marcus had approved before his departure. She had disconnected the landline days earlier under the excuse of a service upgrade, and quietly confiscated the cell phone Marcus had gifted his mother, claiming it needed a software update that never seemed to finish. Piece by piece, every avenue Evelyn had to reach her son was severed until she was left completely isolated, inside the very house her son had given her out of love. Vanessa changed the security codes without explanation, informed the household staff that Evelyn's meals and movements were to be monitored, and instructed the security guards at the gate that Evelyn was not permitted to leave the property without prior written approval. It was a quiet imprisonment, disguised as protection, and Evelyn, trusting the woman her son loved, had no reason yet to suspect betrayal on this scale. The final morning came without warning. Vanessa summoned 2 security guards to the front hall and instructed them, in front of Evelyn, that she needed to vacate the premises immediately for her own transition to the senior facility that supposedly awaited her. When Evelyn asked to gather more of her belongings, Vanessa refused, stating the moving company would handle everything later, though no such company existed. Evelyn was allowed only a single suitcase, hastily packed with a few worn dresses, a faded photograph of Marcus as a smiling toddler, and the leather-bound Bible she had carried with her since she was a young woman. The guards escorted her to the gate, their expressions apologetic, but their instructions clear, and the heavy iron entrance closed behind her with a metallic finality that echoed through the quiet morning street. Evelyn stood alone on the sidewalk, suitcase in hand, staring up at the mansion that had been hers only months before. She did not scream or beg to be let back inside. She simply lowered her head, told herself that perhaps her son truly believed this was best for her, and began to walk, unsure of where her feet would carry her next. The first night without shelter was the hardest Evelyn had faced in over 20 years. She found a covered bus stop bench a few blocks from the mansion, wrapping herself in the thin cardigan she had packed, watching strangers pass without a single glance in her direction. She thought of praying, and did, whispering thanks that Marcus was safe overseas even as she sat cold and displaced on a public bench. By the second day, hunger had settled deep into her stomach, and pride, the same pride that had carried her through decades of hard labor, kept her from approaching strangers for help. It was Samuel Brooks, a retired veteran, who had spent 30 years running a modest corn cart on the corner of a busy avenue, who first noticed her sitting quietly near his stand, watching the steam rise from his grill with a longing she tried to hide. Samuel had seen enough hardship in his own life to recognize it instantly in someone else's eyes. He didn't ask questions that first evening. He simply handed her a warm ear of roasted corn wrapped in foil and told her the corner was safe, that no one bothered his customers, and that she was welcome to sit as long as she needed. Over the following days, Samuel learned pieces of her story, though Evelyn shared only what felt necessary, too proud and too heartbroken to reveal the full truth of her son's mansion and the woman who had thrown her out. Samuel offered her a small room above his storage garage. Nothing luxurious, just a cot, a space heater, and 4 solid walls, but to Evelyn, it felt like the first true kindness she had received since arriving on that cold sidewalk. "Nobody should go hungry," he told her simply, "and nobody should sleep outside if I have a roof to spare." Grateful beyond words, Evelyn asked if she could help around his cart in exchange for the shelter, and Samuel, sensing she needed purpose as much as she needed a place to sleep, agreed without hesitation. Within days, muscle memory took over, her hands remembering exactly how to turn the corn at just the right moment, how much butter and spice to brush across each ear, how to call out warmly to passers-by, the way she had decades earlier, on different street corners across the city. The smoky aroma of roasted corn once again became her signature, drifting down the block and drawing regular customers who had never met her before, but quickly grew fond of her gentle warmth. None of her new customers had any idea that the soft-spoken woman handing them corn wrapped in foil was the mother of one of the wealthiest men in the country. To them, she was simply Miss Evelyn, a kind, elderly woman with a quiet dignity and a smile that never seemed to fade, no matter how cold the mornings became. One young customer, curious about her constant warmth, despite her clearly modest circumstances, asked her one afternoon why she always seemed to be smiling. "Because my son is living his dream," Evelyn told her, "and there is nothing more beautiful than watching your child become everything you prayed he would be." The girl walked away moved nearly to tears, unaware of the full weight behind those words, unaware that the woman who spoke them had been cast out of her own son's mansion and reduced to selling corn on a street corner to survive. Evelyn never allowed bitterness into her voice when she spoke of Marcus. She still believed, deep down, that somewhere far across the ocean, her son still loved her the way he always had, And that belief alone was enough to keep her standing at that grill, morning after morning, rain or shine. The weeks blurred together in a quiet rhythm of survival and small mercies. Evelyn rose before dawn each morning, wrapping herself in an old coat Samuel had found for her at a second-hand shop, and helped him load the cart before the first customers arrived. Regulars began to look for her specifically. A construction worker who always ordered 2 ears with extra butter. A young mother who stopped by every Friday with her toddler perched on her hip. An elderly man who sat on the nearby bench just to talk with her for a few minutes each day. None of them knew her last name. None of them knew that the gentle Etra woman handing them warm corn wrapped in foil had once walked through marble hallways she now could not even call to ask about. Samuel never pried further than she allowed, though he noticed the way her eyes sometimes drifted toward the skyline whenever a certain building caught the afternoon light. He never asked why a woman with such grace and quiet strength had ended up sleeping above his storage garage, and Evelyn never volunteered the full truth, only that circumstances beyond her control had separated her from her son for a season. Samuel simply nodded each time, understanding that some wounds needed silence more than questions, and continued treating her with the same steady kindness he offered every morning, refusing payment for the room, insisting instead that her help at the cart was more than enough in return. There were harder nights, too. Nights when the cold crept through the thin walls of the storage room, and Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering whether her son had truly agreed to send her away, or whether something far darker had taken place behind those mansion doors. She thought of the Bible tucked beside her cot, and often read by the light of a small lamp, finding comfort in verses she had memorized decades earlier during harder years than these. She prayed not for wealth to return to her, but simply for her son's safety, for his happiness, and quietly, for the truth to reveal itself in its own time. Thousands of miles away, Marcus had no idea that any of this was happening. He called every single day exactly as he had promised, his voice filled with warmth each time he asked to speak with his mother. Vanessa answered nearly every call herself, her tone smooth and reassuring, always offering a convincing excuse for why Evelyn couldn't come to the phone that particular moment. She was resting, she told him one week. She had gone out for a walk in the garden, she claimed the next. She had fallen asleep early after a wonderful dinner. She insisted on another occasion, her voice dripping with a tenderness Marcus never once questioned. To maintain the illusion, Vanessa occasionally sent Marcus old photographs and videos of Evelyn from before his departure, carefully timed to coincide with his calls, creating the impression of a mother thriving happily inside the mansion he had given her. She even recorded a few voice messages weeks earlier under a different pretense, splicing fragments together to simulate brief conversations whenever Marcus grew insistent about hearing his mother's voice directly. Marcus, consumed by the demands of opening 3 international offices simultaneously, trusted every word without hesitation. Why would he doubt the woman he was planning to marry? The same woman who had seemingly welcomed his mother with open arms months earlier. Meanwhile, Evelyn had no way of reaching her son even if she had wanted to. She had no phone, no access to a computer, and no idea that Marcus had been calling a house she was no longer permitted to enter. She spent her nights above Samuel's garage wondering when or if her son would ever learn the truth, quietly holding on to faith rather than despair. As the 4th month of Marcus's expansion drew to a close, Vanessa grew increasingly anxious, aware that his return to the country meant her carefully constructed deception was approaching its expiration date. Marcus landed back in the country on a gray autumn afternoon, the kind of crisp, cool day that reminded him of childhood mornings walking beside his mother to her second job. He had decided, against his assistant's advice, not to announce his early arrival, wanting instead to surprise his mother and see her face light up the moment he walked through the mansion doors. He imagined her waiting in the kitchen, humming an old gospel tune while stirring a pot of something warm, exactly as she used to when he was young. His driver navigated through familiar streets, weaving toward a neighborhood he passed through often, on his way to a downtown office building he had recently acquired. As the car slowed near a busy intersection, Marcus glanced idly out the window, his mind still occupied with unpacking logistics from his flight. Something in the corner of his vision made him pause. An elderly woman standing behind a modest corn cart, her posture achingly familiar despite the distance. He leaned closer to the glass, studying the way she moved, the particular tilt of her shoulders as she turned an ear of corn over the open flame. It couldn't possibly be her, he told himself. Yet something deep inside him refused to let the thought go. He asked his driver to pull over, stepping out onto the sidewalk without fully understanding why his heart had begun pounding so violently in his chest. He walked closer, weaving between pedestrians, his eyes locked onto the woman's hands, hands he had watched perform this exact motion 1,000 times throughout his childhood. She wore a thin, weathered scarf around her neck, the same faded pattern he remembered from years ago, tied in the same careful knot his mother always used. Every step closer confirmed what his mind desperately wanted to reject. The woman turned, sensing someone watching her, and for a single suspended moment, mother and son simply stared at each other across the narrow space of a city sidewalk. The bag of corn slipped from Marcus's hand, tumbling unnoticed to the pavement as recognition crashed over him with the force of a physical blow. It was her. It was truly her, standing behind a corn cart on a public street, wearing clothes far more worn than anything he remembered leaving her with. His mind refused to accept what his eyes confirmed, and for several long seconds, Marcus Johnson, a man who commanded boardrooms and closed billion-dollar deals without flinching, could not produce a single word. Evelyn's eyes filled instantly with tears, though she tried, out of habit and pride, to steady her voice and smile, as though everything were perfectly fine. Marcus crossed the remaining distance, in 3 quick strides, and pulled his mother into his arms, holding her so tightly that passers-by slowed to watch the emotional reunion unfolding on the sidewalk. He kept repeating her name, his voice cracking with disbelief, demanding to know how this was possible, how the woman he had left inside a mansion had somehow ended up here, selling corn on a street corner in the cold. "Who did this to you?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rising fury. "Who put you out here?" Evelyn, even in that moment, tried to shield the truth, murmuring something vague about needing fresh air and enjoying the independence of working again. She could not bring herself to name Vanessa directly, some deeply ingrained instinct urging her to protect her son from the pain of confronting the woman he loved. Marcus, however, was no longer a naive boy, easily soothed by gentle deflection. He gently held her face in his hands, searching her eyes, and asked again, softer this time, but with unmistakable urgency. "Please, Mom, tell me the truth." It was Samuel who finally stepped forward from behind the cart, sensing that Evelyn would carry this burden silently forever if someone didn't intervene on her behalf. He introduced himself calmly, extending a steady hand to Marcus, and without dramatics or exaggeration, laid out exactly what had happened over the past 4 months. He described the night Evelyn arrived, cold and alone, with nothing but a small suitcase, the fear in her eyes, and the quiet dignity with which she refused to blame anyone, despite clearly having been wronged. He explained how security guards had escorted her off the property, how her belongings had been reduced to almost nothing, and how she had rebuilt her life from scratch on a street corner rather than beg for help she felt she didn't deserve. Marcus listened in silence, his jaw tightening with every detail, his hands beginning to shake with an anger he had rarely allowed himself to feel in his adult life. When Samuel finished, Marcus turned back to his mother, and for the first time since childhood, tears spilled freely down his face without any attempt to hide them. He sank to his knees right there on the sidewalk, still holding her weathered hands in his, and apologized over and over, begging forgiveness for a betrayal he hadn't committed, but felt entirely responsible for allowing to happen under his own roof. Strangers passing by slowed their steps, several wiping their own eyes, moved by the sight of a grown man kneeling before his mother in raw, unguarded grief. "I trusted the wrong person," Marcus whispered, his forehead pressed against her hands. "I should have protected you. I will fix this, Mom. I promise you. I will fix every single piece of this." Passersby had gathered a small distance away, some filming quietly on their phones, others simply standing in respectful silence as the scene unfolded. An older woman, waiting at the bus stop, pressed a hand to her chest, murmuring that she had never seen anything quite so moving in the middle of a busy afternoon. A young man on his way to work paused, phone forgotten in his pocket, watching a billionaire kneel on a public sidewalk before a woman most people would have walked past without a second glance. None of them yet understood the full story, but they understood enough that love, real love, does not care about mansions or marble floors, only about the people who deserve to be honored. Evelyn, ever gentle despite everything she had endured, lifted his chin and told him softly that she never once stopped believing in him, that her faith had never wavered even during the coldest nights. But Marcus could see something behind her eyes that broke his heart even further, a flicker of exhaustion, of a woman who had quietly wondered whether her son had simply abandoned her without a second thought. That flicker alone was enough to harden his resolve into something unshakable. He helped her to her feet, thanked Samuel with a promise that his kindness would never be forgotten, and guided his mother gently toward his car, determined to uncover every detail of what had truly happened inside his home. Rather than confront Vanessa immediately with rage, Marcus made a calculated decision the moment he settled his mother safely into a private hotel suite, away from the mansion and away from any possibility of further manipulation. He contacted his head of security and requested full, unedited access to every surveillance recording from the estate over the past 4 months, along with detailed logs of staff changes, guest entries, and any modifications made to the household's operations during his absence. He wanted no assumptions, no second-hand accounts, only cold, undeniable evidence laid out before him. Within hours, his security team delivered exactly what he asked for: hundreds of hours of footage compiled and organized by date, alongside a written log, documenting every unusual decision Vanessa had made since the night of his departure. Marcus sat alone in a private office late into the evening, watching in silence as the footage revealed a version of Vanessa he had never witnessed in the year they had been together. He watched her order the housekeeper's dismissal within 48 hours of his flight taking off. He watched her instruct security to restrict Evelyn's movement around the property. Then came the footage he had been dreading. The morning Evelyn was forced to leave. The camera captured everything with brutal clarity. Vanessa standing in the foyer with her arms crossed, her voice raised as she berated Evelyn for supposedly overstepping boundaries that never actually existed. The audio caught her final words with chilling precision, a sharp command ordering the guards to escort the elderly woman off the property immediately, followed by the sound of a suitcase hitting the pavement outside the gate. Marcus watched his own mother's face on that screen, watched the moment humiliation and heartbreak washed over her, and he had to pause the recording twice, simply to breathe through the rage rising in his chest. He did not confront Vanessa that night. He did not confront her the following morning either, choosing instead to gather every remaining piece of evidence: financial statements showing unauthorized transfers from household accounts, forged documents bearing a signature that was clearly not his own, and testimonies from staff members who had been too frightened to speak up while Vanessa held control of the estate. Marcus understood that exposing the truth quietly would never be enough. Vanessa needed to face the consequences of her actions in a setting where her manipulation could no longer hide behind charm or excuses, where the world she had so carefully curated for herself would witness exactly who she truly was. 2 weeks later, Marcus announced an elegant evening gathering at the mansion, framing it publicly as a celebration marking his successful international expansion. Word spread quickly among the city's business elite, and soon the guest list included prominent investors, members of his board of directors, respected journalists from major financial publications, and dozens of familiar faces from the same social circles. Vanessa had always been desperate to impress. Vanessa herself received the news with barely contained excitement, convinced that the evening's true purpose was something far more personal. She spent days preparing, commissioning a custom gown, scheduling appointments with stylists, and quietly telling close friends that she suspected Marcus intended to propose in front of everyone who mattered most to him. She saw the gathering as the crowning achievement of everything she had worked toward, the moment her calculated performance would finally culminate in the life of luxury and status she had chased for years. She had no idea that the evening had been designed with an entirely different outcome in mind, one that would strip away every layer of the image she had spent so long constructing. The night of the event, the mansion's grand hall glittered with soft golden light, string quartets playing quietly as guests mingled with champagne in hand. Vanessa arrived on Marcus's arm, radiant and confident, greeting guests with practiced warmth, completely unaware of the storm gathering just beneath the surface of the evening. Marcus remained composed throughout dinner, his expression giving away nothing, even as Vanessa leaned close and whispered that she couldn't wait to see what he had planned. When dessert concluded, Marcus rose from his seat, tapped his glass gently, and asked for everyone's attention as the room fell into an expectant hush. He began by thanking his guests for their support throughout the expansion, his voice calm and measured, giving no indication of what was about to unfold. Then, without warning, the large screen mounted behind him flickered to life, displaying the surveillance footage he had spent weeks reviewing in private. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Vanessa's voice echoed through the speakers, sharp and cold, ordering Evelyn's removal from the property. The room watched in stunned silence as the footage played out in full. The suitcase, the closed gate, the elderly woman left standing alone on the sidewalk. Vanessa's face drained of all color as murmurs spread rapidly among the guests, several of them turning to stare at her with open disbelief. She attempted to speak, stammering something about misunderstandings and difficult circumstances, but her voice was quickly drowned out by the disgust visibly forming on the faces around her. Marcus allowed the footage to finish playing entirely, before turning to face her directly, his expression carrying none of the affection that had once defined their relationship. "The woman you humiliated built the man standing before you," Marcus said, his voice steady and unwavering, despite the emotion clearly simmering beneath it. "Everything I have, every accomplishment this room came here to celebrate tonight, exists because she sacrificed everything she had so that I could stand here today," he continued, addressing not just Vanessa, but the entire room, explaining without exaggeration exactly what his mother had endured over the past 4 months: the street corner, the small room above a stranger's garage, the humility with which she rebuilt her life, rather than expose the truth and burden her son from overseas. Several guests wiped tears from their eyes, while others stared at Vanessa with unmistakable contempt. The same social circle she had worked so hard to impress now, recoiling from her completely. Vanessa tried once more to defend herself, insisting she had acted out of concern for Marcus's business reputation. But her words fell flat against the undeniable footage still frozen on the screen behind her. Marcus's next words carried the full weight of finality. He announced, in front of every investor, journalist, and board member present, that his relationship with Vanessa was permanently over, that any engagement anyone believed was coming that evening would never happen. He revoked every financial privilege she had been granted during their relationship, terminated her access to company-related accounts, and instructed his legal team, already present among the guests, to begin the formal process of removing her name from any documents connecting her to his estate or businesses. Security quietly approached to escort her from the premises immediately, her carefully curated evening collapsing into public humiliation within a matter of minutes. A few of Vanessa's closest friends, the very women who had once mocked Evelyn's worn cardigan and country accent in this same mansion, now stood frozen near the bar, unable to meet anyone's eyes. One board member quietly commented to a colleague that character always reveals itself eventually, no matter how well it is hidden behind expensive fabric and rehearsed smiles. A journalist near the back of the room was already typing notes into her phone, aware that the story unfolding before her would dominate headlines by morning, not as a scandal about a broken engagement, but as a story about a mother's quiet endurance finally brought into the light. By the time Vanessa reached the front doors, her name had already begun circulating through group messages and private calls among the very elite circles she had spent years trying to infiltrate, and none of the conversations were kind. As Vanessa was led out through the same grand doors she had once walked through as the woman of the house, the silence in the room spoke louder than any words could. Marcus did not watch her leave. His attention had already shifted toward a quiet figure standing near the back of the hall, dressed simply, watching everything unfold with tearful, proud eyes. Evelyn had insisted on being present that evening, not for revenge, but because she wanted to witness her son stand firmly in the truth, no matter how painful that truth had become for everyone involved. In the days following the gathering, Marcus moved his mother back into the mansion, determined to restore everything Vanessa had stripped from her. New staff who treated her with genuine warmth, full access to every room, and a sense of security no one would ever be permitted to threaten again. Yet within the first week, Marcus noticed something troubling in his mother's demeanor. A quiet hesitation whenever she walked through the vast, echoing hallways, as though the house itself still carried the memory of what had happened inside it. One evening, as they sat together on the same balcony where he had once promised to call her every day, Evelyn finally spoke the truth, resting heavy on her heart. "Marcus," she said gently, taking his hand in hers, "you don't need to build your mother a palace. All I ever wanted was for you to never miss a meal with me." Her words landed with a weight far heavier than any boardroom negotiation Marcus had ever faced in his career. He realized, sitting there beside her, that the mansion, the marble floors, and the sprawling gardens had never been what mattered most to his mother. What she truly wanted, what she had always wanted, since he was a barefoot boy listening to her footsteps return late at night, was simply his presence, his time, his undivided attention, rather than another gift meant to compensate for his absence. That single realization changed the direction of his life more profoundly than any business deal ever had. Marcus began restructuring his entire company in the weeks that followed, delegating major responsibilities to trusted executives and stepping back from the relentless travel schedule that had once defined his career. He carved out mornings for coffee with his mother on the balcony, evenings for dinners cooked together in the mansion's kitchen, exactly the way she used to cook for him in their small apartment decades earlier. He learned, slowly and deliberately, how to measure success not by the size of his empire, but by the number of ordinary, unremarkable moments he now shared with the woman who had given him everything. One decision, however, mattered more to Evelyn than any other change Marcus made during that period. He refused to let Samuel's corn cart and the entire block surrounding it remain just another forgotten corner of the city. Marcus quietly purchased the surrounding properties, working closely with local residents and business owners to transform the area into a vibrant community square rather than another glass and steel development stripped of character. He preserved the modest storefronts, expanded green space for families to gather, and ensured that every small business already rooted there, including Samuel's, remained exactly where it belonged. At the heart of the newly transformed square, Marcus placed a fully restored version of the very corn cart that had once given his mother shelter and purpose during the darkest months of her life. He named the entire community space Evelyn's Corner, a permanent tribute standing not as a monument to wealth, but as a quiet reminder that dignity and kindness often live in the most unexpected places. Samuel was given ownership of a small building beside the square, ensuring the man who had sheltered Evelyn without asking for anything in return would never again worry about hardship himself. On a crisp autumn afternoon months later, Marcus stood beside his mother once again behind a corn cart, though this time it wasn't survival driving her hands, but joy. Dressed simply, without a hint of the billionaire status that once separated him from ordinary life, Marcus turned ears of corn over an open flame exactly the way his mother had taught him as a child. The smell of roasted corn drifted through the square, mingling with laughter from children playing nearby, and the quiet hum of neighbors greeting one another beneath strings of warm lights. Evelyn watched her son work beside her, his sleeves rolled up, his laughter easy and unguarded in a way she hadn't seen since he was young. She reached over, gently squeezing his arm, and smiled the kind of smile that held no trace of the pain from months earlier. "Now," she said softly, "I am truly home." Marcus looked at her, at the corner that once represented her lowest moment, now transformed into a place of warmth and community, and understood at last that the greatest inheritance he could ever leave behind wasn't measured in wealth, but in the love and gratitude he chose to give the people who shaped his life.